The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline, of Phoenix Suns podcast, back with a actual head coach. Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing great here on a Tuesday afternoon. We wanted to wait an extra day specifically for you guys because we knew that the Jordan Ott press conference, the introductory press conference, was going to be today, and we wanted to react to it immediately to feed the people the slop that they deserve. I don't think this is slop, actually. This is like one of the only times in the summer that we don't react to slop, it feels like, is we're talking about something. Later on in the episode.
We'll get to the slop.
But today we got to meet Jordan Ott, first-time NBA head coach, welcome him to the Valley, and sort of get our first impressions for, not just like his resume, which we've talked about to death, but his demeanor and his mannerisms and his philosophy. And although the press conference was only half an hour, I felt that we learned a lot about the guy, and I was excited based on what I heard. How about you?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction, like last week I mentioned on the podcast when we talked about him being hired, that I'm actually tentatively excited by this hiring. Understanding, of course, all of the baggage that comes with hiring someone who worked at Michigan State. I still was excited by the hiring overall. I came away from this press conference feeling the same. I feel the same about it overall. I think some of his philosophies, some of his ideas that he talked about were interesting, and I'm excited to see those put into action. This team overall, I think the personnel, obviously, like all basketball teams, that is the most important thing as far as putting together a team that is going to actually work next year. But there was nothing about this press conference that made me feel the way that, say, the Brian Gregory press conference made me feel, which was not overly excited. But this was ultimately the first decision of Brian Gregory's reign, if you will, and it started out with Brian Gregory and Jordan Ott walking up to that podium together, to that table together, and it was Brian Gregory himself who introduced Jordan Ott and spent about a good few minutes to start this press conference, really talking him up, really talking about how they all were, if you will, aligned on this decision, and that Jordan Ott from the beginning was the guy that they wanted. Whether or not that's true is not something that we really know, but it was the guy that they chose at the end of all of this. And he said it was an extensive search.
Yeah.
Group of diverse, highly talented candidates.
I mean, we know it was
diverse.
It was an extensive search based on all the names they fed us. So they made it very clear that they wanted to project that idea. This is pretty far down the list of like important things that we learned today, but I do just want to point out Gregory acknowledged that he said he called it a buzzword. Basically, it was a meme. That the word alignment was a meme at his introductory press conference. I just think it's funny that he acknowledged that because it means he sees the memes. He sees the reactions of what's going on.
He's got a
online.
Twitter account. Yeah,
and I don't. That's where I was going with this. I don't know if it's because he directly is going on Twitter or if it's fed to him through a second.
Does he follow us,
source?
Sam?
He doesn't follow me, and I don't know. You can check. But we weren't the only ones talking about it, right? Everyone was talking about how often that word was used. And I thought it was funny that basically the only time that word was used in today's presser was Brian Gregory being like, yeah, that was the buzzword last time, and just sort of tongue-in-cheek acknowledging what happened a month ago.
Have I mentioned on the podcast that Justin Ishbia follows me?
Which one is Justin Ishbia?
It's Matt Ishbia's brother, the one that's also one of the owners. Does he follow you? I was actually curious about that. We've never talked about this.
I have not checked. I'll check later. Let's talk about Jordan Ott.
Okay. One of the things actually that Brian Gregory mentioned at the beginning, he talked about how important it was that they found someone that fit in the community. I was kind of curious what he meant by that. He said that Suns fans are sort of demanding in a good way. Like, he didn't say this in a negative way, of course. and that they really wanted to find someone that met that. And I'm curious if we ever find out what he meant by that. But yeah, we had Jordan Ott speaking for the first time. First of all, my first impression looking at him, he does look very young. You know, I think he's probably around 39 or 40. I think we actually found out his age finally. And he is very young. He's going to be one of the youngest head coaches in the NBA in this coming season, and has worked in the NBA a long time. Talked about his time working in the NBA. One of the first things he mentioned as far as his time in the NBA is he can still hear Patrick Beverley barking in his ear. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't realize they had worked together at any point in the NBA, but mentioning Patrick Beverley here in Phoenix is kind of an interesting place to start. My first impression of him seems competent, seems sort of calm in his demeanor. Confident is important. You mentioned it on Twitter, I believe, in talking about him. To be someone who is a first-time head coach and to project that confidence, I think is going to be really important. That was, I think, my first impression of seeing him speak.
He would have worked with Patrick Beverley just a few years ago on the Lakers, one of his seasons with the Darvin Ham Lakers. So towards the end of Beverley's career, I think the reason, just for anyone who missed the press conference, that he specifically mentioned Beverley by name was to sort of be like, as a coach, you're put in a lot of high pressure, high leverage situations where you have to earn the respect of all sorts of players from a wide spectrum of demeanors themselves, right? And so that's sort of where that came from. It's just like, right. Imagine having a guy like Patrick Beverley shouting in your ear all the time. It sort of molds you into a specific type of coach. But yeah, as I said on Twitter, quiet confidence is the way that I would describe him. And it's funny because, like, you know, in the first couple minutes of the presser, I think I could sense like just the faintest hint of maybe nervousness out of Jordan Ott, but also like just an appreciation for the moment, like almost as if he was taking his time to find his words, because he was still trying to process the fact that, as he said at some point, I forget who asked him this question, but someone asked him the question of, at what point in time did you think that maybe you could get here to being not just an assistant coach, but a head coach? And he said he has so much respect for the coaching profession that you never want to assume, basically. And so I think
too much respect is how he worded it, which I think came off sort of almost like Monty Williams in the way he spoke about people who worked in the NBA.
I think at the beginning he was just sort of processing the fact that, he's really here and he made it. But he also spoke with so much gratitude for the people, the other coaches he had worked with, and the players that he had worked with who got him into this position in the first place. So I think the most successful part about it, just in terms of like how the guy speaks, is it's a difficult thing to walk the line, which I think is exactly what Jordan Ott did, of expressing gratitude, understanding why you are where you are, and like, you know, trying to lift up the other people, the good people who've been around you. And at the same time, not taking any shit, right? Mad respect on my part to the AP reporter who asked specifically about, hey, people are joking about the Phoenix Spartans, you know, and acknowledging the fact that Jordan Ott worked for MSU, not at the same time as Matt Ishbia and Brian Gregory, but that he was there later on in the 2000s and trying to just point out that connection, because, of course, as fans, it's what we're all thinking of. But, like, I think it's awesome that question was asked. I also think it's awesome the way that Ott responded to that question, which is in this very just kind of authoritative yet quiet manner, being like, I've earned the right to be here. I have worked 20 years to be in this position, 7 years in college, 13 years in the NBA or something like that. You know, I've worked my butt off for 20 years to be here. And yes, he has gratitude for all the people who have been around him, but you look into his eyes in that moment and you really believe that he has that confidence, right? You really believe that he knows that he deserves to be here among the presence of 29 other NBA coaches, understanding how difficult it is to get one of these positions in the first place. So I really respected him in that moment. And again, I think it was a good question to ask, but I really like the confidence that he projects.
I appreciate that it was asked. His exact words were, "I know I earned this opportunity." Which, you know, saying that right next to Brian Gregory is kind of funny. But I agree that he's earned this opportunity, and I appreciate his confidence in that, saying, I know I earned this opportunity. Shout out to the person who asked it. I don't know his name. He's from the Associated Press. I do think I almost appreciate that it was asked by somebody that doesn't have to go to every game, because I do think it's hard sometimes for these guys that are at every game talking to these coaches all the time to ask something that maybe puts them in a weird position with them going forward.
I mean,
so
it's your
shout out to that guy who actually did
it's
it.
literally their first impression.
Yeah.
Of the beat reporters, the lovely beat reporters that we have, I would say Dwayne is maybe the one who's most willing to ask a question like that. And
Yes.
even he didn't do it. Right. So I think that says something. But shout out to the AP.
By the way, thanks. Yeah, thanks to all the men and women who did this job and who were there asking the questions. I always appreciate them for giving us the opportunity to talk about it the way we do on the podcast. Without those guys, we'd have very little to talk about. So Kellen, Dwayne, Gerald, Brendan, all the people, Shane, who are there asking questions. Thank you guys for doing your job so well. Let's talk about how, by the way, I'll just mention he thanked Matt Ishbia, Brian Gregory, and Josh Bartlestein for the opportunity. Just throwing it out there, if we want
was the hiring committee. Those were the guys.
Yeah, if we want to fully understand who are pulling the strings, technically James Jones still works there, but if we want to fully understand who are pulling the strings with this organization, I think in that order, Matt Ishbia, Brian Gregory, Josh Bartlestein, thanking them, probably somewhat of a sign. But he was asked about his offensive and defensive philosophies, and ultimately, this is the part I care about when this conversation comes up. What are the Suns going to look like next year? So let's start with offense. He said, of course, everyone's going to talk about playing faster, which I think is true. It's a buzz. It's sort of the buzzy thing to do in the NBA is to talk about playing faster. It happens every few years. Pace is going to be important. But particularly for the Phoenix Suns, this team they have never played really fast in Devin Booker's career. Maybe they've cracked the top 10 at some points, but never really in the upper side of that. Faster earlier in the clock, he mentioned, he said that efficiency, when it comes to in the actual shot clock, efficiency starts high and then drops lower. So we understand the concept of efficiency as it pertains to the shot clock. He said, we're going to move. Cutting is important. We're going to cut. We're going to move bodies, and we're going to find ways to get extra possessions. So this is all the stuff I think that is obvious with what's going on in the NBA today. Playing fast, getting the ball over the half-court line quickly so that your offense starts early in the shot clock and trying to get quick shots off of that, but also extra possessions, whether that be defensively or he even mentioned it, crashing the boards and finding ways to get extra possessions when it comes to crashing the boards. All of this sounds great. I hope that they actually do it. I think that other coaches have talked about these kinds of things on the Suns in the past, but I am happy to hear that the things he's talking about is the type of stuff that we've been begging for here on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are personnel based, right? And so any coach can come in and talk about these things, but let's be honest, when you talk about both being more physical, he says, I know we're going to get to defense in a moment, but he did say he wants to play an aggressive defense, right? That was the word he used. And when you kind of talk about being both aggressive on defense, maybe crashing the glass on offense, and playing faster at the same time, without saying it, you are silently acknowledging that you anticipate being a younger team, right? Just understanding that the Suns were outmatched last year, whether it was, as I've said in the past, maybe a case of apathy, a few too many players at the tail end of their careers who just don't care that much anymore. But also
a few too many no trade clauses,
too many no trade clauses, and a few too many guys also though who just can't do it. Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, in terms of the physical aspect of the game, might be able to shoot, but just can't match the physical energy that maybe certain guys who are in their early 20s can do in the NBA these days.
Especially if they're being asked to play power forward, which they are sometimes.
So, to me, it signals, and this should not be a surprise to anyone, but the Suns are going to be younger next year. And the first domino to fall is going to be the Kevin Durant trade, which we'll have plenty more to say, I guess, in the back half of this episode, as we've been talking about it every week for the past 12 weeks. I do think the other interesting thing, though, is you talk about pace. While it is true that it's a buzzword, I will acknowledge that. Would it surprise you that the NBA has not actually gotten any faster in the past several years? If you look at the stats.
No, actually, because it got to such an insane pace. We've talked about it in the past, but at certain times in the last few years, the 7 seconds or less Suns would have ranked in the 20s, like the 20th team in pace.
Right, but
so it just got to such an insane speed. So I can't imagine it would get much faster than
exactly, right. So it hit a plateau, basically. And I think, if anything, the innovations we've seen in the NBA over the past few years, of course, like a lot of these good teams, the Pacers, the Cavs, who Jordan Ott worked for, are fast teams at the moment. The Thunder, they do just so happen to be fast teams. But I think a lot of the innovations we've seen are teams finding more ways to eke out like just a little bit of extra efficiency. And to me, that comes from their space more than their pace. Because if you actually look at the pace, it peaked, according to Basketball Reference here, at 100.3 possessions per game in the 2019-2020 season. So half a decade ago is actually when pace peaked. Since then, this past year, in the regular season, of course, in the playoffs is a little bit different, it was at 98.8 possessions per game, basically the same, but like one possession less per game for the average team in the NBA right now compared to where we were 5 or 6 years ago. So like the 2000s ended, Nash and company were like the sort of pre-evolution, and then came Steph and the death lineups with the Warriors and whatever. And then the innovation started coming really, really fast. At a certain point, though, around 2018, 2019, is sort of when all of that plateaued, and it felt like so many teams were moving forward in terms of their pace, with just a few notable exceptions of like almost dragging the entire league down. And the Suns over the past few years have been one of those exceptions. Just one of these teams that demands to not play the sort of late 2010s style of basketball that everyone else is playing. They have been one of the most stubborn examples of a team clinging on to an old style. So I think Ott is absolutely right to come out here and say, we want to play faster. We want to win the possession battle, whether that means turning it over less on offense, crashing more on offense, or forcing turnovers on defense, some combination of the three. But I also think he's more right when he says it about the Suns than if just like an average coach would come into like your average team and say it these days.
100%.
Because the Suns truly have had issues doing all of this stuff for the past 5, even when they've been good.
It's even personnel related.
Even when they were a 64-win team. Other than the fact that Chris Paul
doesn't want to play fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that Chris Paul did
Kevin
not
Durant
turn the ball
doesn't want
over.
to play fast.
They didn't play fast.
Yeah. Kevin Durant doesn't want to play fast either. Kevin Durant, even though I think it would benefit him he's just such a great early shot clock taker. It would benefit him to shoot a little bit more early in the shot clock. It's just getting the ball into the post where he likes it. That takes 7 or 8 seconds already, and then you have to play based on that. So without him on the team, which we anticipate he's not going to be on the team based on every single report that we hear about the Suns in the last few months, it's going to be a little bit easier to play faster depending on the personnel. And of course, youth, I think, will matter. Devin Booker, though, too, I think hasn't really played in a way that benefits them playing faster either, because he's so often pressed. If he's bringing the ball down the court, they need other guys to be able to do that if they want to play faster. He's got to come flying off pin downs and catching the ball from a point guard. And by the way, if you're going to talk about cutting, they're going to need better passing on the team too. Like, cutting is great, and you can see how important it is in this current playoffs. Just watch, Josh Hart, for example, is a great example of that, someone who doesn't shoot. Obi Toppin, who, by the way, can shoot now, apparently, and has had really big threes in the playoffs, but is also a great cutter and finds ways to do it. Or Alex Caruso is another great example on OKC. All of these players are pretty good at cutting, and all of them can cut at the right time if the defense is going to be centered around a player like SGA or Halliburton or Brunson. But they all need to pass well in order to find those cutters. So for the Suns, they're going to need someone other than Devin Booker to be able to actually make plays. And that's going to be an interesting thing for them to try to solve. Because, for a lot of the fake trades that we've done, other than Trae Young, who we've talked about, there's not a lot of great passers that we've, maybe a couple bigs.
Sabonis is a playmaking hub for sure. No, you're totally right. Like, some of these guys that we've talked about, if they went out and got Jalen Green in a Rockets trade, or Devin Vassell in a Spurs trade, or Who else is like a common name that's thrown around? OG Anunoby in a Knicks trade. Like
Jabari Smith Jr.
Jabari Smith Jr. These guys are not playmakers. Yeah. And we've said all along, yes, the Suns need to be big. They need to be physical. They need to attack the glass. All of this is true. They're not going anywhere as a playoff team. Like, their hopes are just dead in the water if they don't have something resembling a number 2 next to Devin Booker, who can be a pressure release valve for him. And a lot of these guys that we talk about in these trade packages as playmakers, they just don't fit that bill. So, yeah, it's going to be really challenging given the Suns' asset pool and what they're dealing with. But obviously, we've made some of those trades in the past. And, who knows? Maybe they'll get Trae Young. Maybe they'll get Sabonis.
You're going to run out of coffee at some point, so you might as well order some now. Take out your phone, go to your computer, go to alchemyroaster.com. That's alchemyroaster.com and buy some coffee now. Alchemy Roast is a Metro Phoenix-based coffee roaster that focuses on the transformational process of coffee from seed to cup. They're about more than just coffee. They're about passion, dedication, and community. They're a small batch roastery committed to sourcing the finest beans and mastering the art of the roast. And they do it ethically. That's right, ethical beans. You can get 10% off your coffee order now by using the promo code TIMELINE at alchemyroaster.com. That's TIMELINE at alchemyroaster.com in the promo code section of your checkout. Get some great coffee, support a local Phoenix business that makes excellent coffee, and support us on the podcast by using that promo code. That's alchemyroaster.com, promo code TIMELINE for the best coffee you can get. Let's talk about defense. So we talked about how Jordan Ott talked about offense, and you mentioned a couple of things that he mentioned when it comes to defense, but a couple of the things that he mentioned when it comes to defense, the first word he used was aggressive, and you're right. You mentioned that previously, and obviously, he even alluded to it. Obviously, it's important. Just watch the playoffs. Like, it's been so important with the way OKC plays in particular, but even Indiana or at times the Knicks were able to do that, and of course, Minnesota, that's like their whole thing. Aggressive defense, but I thought the bit he talked about when it comes to communication was really kind of interesting because the three things he mentioned, just to really wrap it up: aggressive, communication, effort, all-out effort all the time. So those are three things: aggressive, communication, and effort. But he talked about how offenses in the NBA have become so random and conceptual that they're less about plays, they're more about concepts and working around those concepts. And that has put a premium on communication and how important it is to communicate well on the floor so that these types of offenses that aren't just the same plays being run over and over again, that players are moving randomly based on where the ball is on the floor, that communication is what stops that. I thought that was particularly interesting, especially for this team. You know, we talked a lot about what we wanted from a head coach in our last podcast where we talked about Jordan Ott being hired, and preparation and the team being prepared was a thing that I could not stop talking about when it comes to defense. So it is harder to be prepared in today's NBA, and I think a lot of fans who watch the game don't realize how complex offenses have become and how difficult it is to play defense now. But this team was not communicating. This team was not prepared, and they need to be 100%. Going forward.
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back to a lot of the failures of the Budenholzer regime. You know, the irony of it that we were talking about. I think it was our friend Ty Windish who covers the Bucks for Blue Wire was saying in your replies. I saw it's kind of funny how Budenholzer still has such a successful coaching tree, and that includes Jordan Ott, who worked as a video coordinator under Budenholzer with the Hawks, as well as Damari Carroll, who we can talk about a little bit. I don't know if you have that down in your outline.
Yeah.
It was never a problem with Bud. The ideas were never the problem, right? And he could come into a presser and he could say the right ideas, but the execution, for whatever reason, everyone talked about how he was kind of miserable to work with. I don't know exactly what was going on that led to that situation, but there's a whole lot of difference between, up to use a Montyism, well said versus well done, right? I think so much of the lack of communication for the Suns last year, again, just came down to lack of preparedness on Bud's part, but also this general culture of apathy that seeped into the players. And you're right. We don't respect players enough for the amount of space that they have to cover in today's NBA, because it just gets harder and harder, especially if you're either one of these small guards, a la the Chris Pauls, who have to kind of hide somewhere, or you're one of the lumbering drop-only bigs, and you also kind of can only play in certain systems, right? It's just becoming more and more difficult every year. But with Ott, he talked about how the Cavs, this more applies to offense, but he was you look at the way the Cavs played last year, everyone wants to play like the Cavs. I think he said that at some point in the press conference. And it's true. The Cavs were a successful offensive team. That was really what led to their success overall. They were a great offensive team, but they were also a top 10 defensive team. And they were also a top 15, according to Cleaning the Glass here, team defensively, in terms of forcing turnovers. Whereas the Suns, if you look at them, their opponent turnover percentage, the Suns were 28th in that stat last year, to go back to this idea of how do you build an aggressive defense. It's interesting because if you look at the Cavs roster, is there that much that would tell you the Cavs could be a successful defensive team? If you were just looking at the pieces that they had on paper. They have Darius Garland's a small guard. Donovan Mitchell is talented defensively, but is a small guard. Max Strus, what's Max Strus's wingspan? Is he one of those white guys with a negative wingspan? He plays a lot of minutes.
I don't know, but looking at him, I would say yes.
And I know they have Evan Mobley, and I know they have Jared Allen, so they've got the dual bigs.
And that's where it is.
They have a lot. They have a lot.
Defensive player of the year. Remember,
you can't be a good defensive team without having the personnel somewhere. I recognize that. I understand that, but the Cavs squeezed a lot out of not necessarily having a ton of juice on their roster.
Jerome, too, played a ton of minutes.
Yeah, so some of that is personnel, but some of it is communication. And that's where Ott can take the successes of the Cleveland story. Again, I know they didn't do well in the playoffs, but he could take at least the regular season successes and hope to apply them to maybe a similar situation in Phoenix, where, again, I hope they get bigger next year. I hope they draft some athletes in 2 or 3 weeks. But they're not going to go from one of the least athletic teams to the most athletic in 2 months. It's probably just not going to happen. So at some point, they're going to have to develop this culture, this communication, this cohesion that they simply lacked last year. And coaching is a massive portion of that.
It is one of those things where he said all the right things offensively. He said all the right things defensively from how we view what the current NBA is. But it's all going to be about buy-in and personnel and how much the guys out there are able to execute and what they're trying to do. And, you talked about Bud briefly, and of course he's someone who worked for Bud in the past. One thing Bud did was tell Devin Booker to stop talking during games. One thing Ott mentioned in this press conference is we need everyone at all levels to find solutions. That's how he talked about it. Now, he said at all levels, he's talking about video coordinator, trainer, to players, to coaching staff. And he even said during the game, during practice, during workouts, everyone is able. It's basically the idea of sort of crowdsourcing the solutions to whatever the team is trying to solve. And then that is a smart way to do it. It's sort of a democratic view of coaching. Everyone is capable of coming up with ideas. Steve Kerr famously putting Bogut on Tony Allen in the playoffs. Do you remember this story Steve Kerr told? At the time, it was not common to put bigs on shooters or smaller players.
I don't think I've heard this story.
Well, famously, he was asked about it after the game, and he said, "Who thought of that?" And he was like, "It was a video coordinator who said maybe we should try this." And there was a lot of people who don't remember, there was a lot of pretty amazing battles between those grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies teams and the Warriors. You wouldn't think of that now if you weren't watching at the time, but the Grizzlies were pretty good, and they were a team that gave the Warriors a lot of trouble, and one of the solutions was putting a big on Tony Allen, and it was not Steve Kerr's idea. I think about that commonly because I think coaches need to sort of take their ego out of it in order to make the best decision. Yeah. Best idea wins is the best idea. And he talked about that here. And by the way, relevant because of that Booker situation with Bud in the past.
Well, again, as a first-time head coach, you're coming into this position, ego has to be out of the equation, right? And I understand, like, also you're a first-time head coach, which means you're trying to, like, as much as you're probably not thinking about this, you might be thinking about, like, how does the first job lead to the second job, right? Like, how do you build, God, I don't want to use the legacy word, but how do you build an identity? Like, you know, your vision. Who is Jordan Ott as a coach? And yet, he sort of acknowledged this. If you want to develop a partnership, if you want to develop a trust with the players, like, NBA head coaching is not some sympathy job that any player is going to respect you just for getting the job. You have to develop trust with them by allowing them to believe that you're helping them in some sense, right? And this is something that Ott stressed several times. It's like, you know, they have to know that we are here to help them. And that is where the trust is going to start coming from once they understand that everything we do is going to be putting them in a position to succeed. So yeah, I mean, it's just one more place where I was impressed, came away impressed with his answers, and is maybe not necessarily the approach that you would see from, say, if they hired a 15-year or 20-year NBA head coaching veteran, because he understands that he has to earn this trust from the ground up. But also, like, the same thing is, he has to earn the trust, but also he speaks with this confidence. And honestly, like, again, like, if you didn't see the presser, I'd encourage you to go back and, like, even just watch a couple minutes of it. Jordan Ott, he seems kind of intense. Like, the way I described it talking in our Discord is I got a little bit of Quinn Snyder vibes. If you all know, like, the scowl that Quinn Snyder is famous for having on the sidelines, he just, like maybe it's democratic. He's not, like, a totally authoritarian coach, but he has that look of don't fuck with me. And I think you need to have both in order to be successful, because NBA players are going to challenge you. As much as we want to say we're going to draft high character guys and we're going to make sure our locker room is full of high character guys, there's always going to be a couple of stragglers, right? And at a certain point, you need to find ways to motivate everyone on the team, not just the highest character guys on your roster.
You're right, and sometimes it's helpful to have young players who are still trying to prove themselves, right? And for a young coach like him, because those are the guys that are trying to make a name for themselves in the NBA. In order to get minutes, they have to do what the coach tells them, rather than a lot of stars can just sort of play in their own way, and the coach has to adapt to them. Speaking of stars, he talked about Devin Booker, and you know, getting the buy-in of someone like Devin Booker is going to be really important. And what we heard, and we talked about it before, when we talked about him being hired, is that Booker was involved with this process, and he told a story about running a actual draft workout for Devin Booker in the past. It must have been the Hawks, I'm guessing.
Yeah, 2015.
Is the team that he was on at the time.
Definitely the Hawks.
And he said...
now I have to look up who the Hawks ended up taking in that draft. It's going to kill me.
And where they picked. Yeah, look it up while I talk about this. But he talks about them doing a 1-on-0 workout is how he described it. So Devin Booker just sort of working out by himself, no defender on him, just coaches and rebounders. And Devin Booker talking to himself the whole time to hype himself up, and how he communicated even with himself, which is something we heard a lot about Devin Booker early on in his career. And he said we came away from that workout thinking that Devin Booker was going to be different. Who did they pick? I got to know.
2 picks after Phoenix. So 15th overall, Booker went 13th. They took Kelly Oubre Jr.
Oh, wow.
But he did not play for Atlanta, so this must have been a trade, right? What?
I guess so.
Yeah, because Oubre played his rookie season with Washington. So what happened here on draft night? I got to figure this out.
Okay. The other thing he mentioned about Devin Booker that I like the way he worded it is he said, we need to help him. So in describing Devin Booker, he sort of is implying that the Phoenix Suns let him down. You know, he talked about his time leading a team to the NBA Finals and how quickly he had success at a young age, and acknowledged that this team needs to work together and better to help Devin Booker to succeed. And I appreciated that. I think it's a smart way to ingratiate yourself to Suns fans. You figured it out?
No, this is a 3-team trade. Why is this confusing? So Jerian Grant so they traded
Jerian, yeah.
Was it Jerian?
I think it was.
I don't remember.
I could be wrong.
I don't remember how to pronounce his name. Jeremy Grant's brother, right? Who did not go on to do anything really in the NBA? Or did I just make that up? Was he not? No, he was.
I don't know.
He was Jeremy Grant's brother. Okay. But Jerian Grant, went to the Knicks. So I think this pick was traded, the 15th overall pick that was used for Kelly Oubre was traded to Washington, and the Knicks sent Tim Hardaway Jr. to the Hawks.
Oh, okay.
That's a very mid outcome for what happened.
Well, they knew Devin Booker was going to be a star, it sounded like, so they probably would have picked him.
Tim Hardaway Jr.
if they had the opportunity
Young Tim Hardaway Jr. was kind of like Devin Booker if you squint really, really hard. Maybe they had hopes. Because at the time, he would have been like 23 or something. Maybe they were hoping he could become something he's had a good career, but, you know.
What do you think about him talking about Devin Booker? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just the fact that you need to have guys who have that competitive fire, right? And I thought it was interesting. Just he was also asked about his overall approach to scouting, and he said that you have to trust that the player is going to do exactly what they say.
High character guys was what he said was the most important thing.
You could argue that the Suns in the past with their scouting have had an issue with not trusting that a player is going to do exactly what they say. For instance, when DeAndre Ayton said that his goal in the NBA was to get to his second contract and they still drafted him number 1 overall. Perhaps that was a case of learn from your mistakes, and I hope they have. But yeah, high character.
No one's there anymore anyway. So.
Yeah, it's true. None of them are there. I know that was the approach that they took with Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro. I also think that it's not necessarily always an approach. I mean, we both really liked those guys in their rookie years, but we also recognize that's like a long-term thing of we are going to develop these guys, but we're also taking them because we're banking on their work ethic paying off, not just in year 1, but really like in year 2 and year 3. Like what is Ryan Dunn? Is Ryan Dunn going to come back as a 40% pull-up three-point shooter next year because of this crazy work ethic? He's the first guy in the gym every single morning while other guys are, drinking beer during the summer or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
But that's the general strategy that they're banking on, and who knows, maybe it can give us some clues for what they end up looking at in the draft this year, which is hopefully not just Jace Richardson.
Yeah, or in trades, the high character guys thing is a very James Jones thing to say. That was always something he talked about and how important it was for championship teams to have guys like that. It wasn't always about just athleticism. It was more about their ability to remain high character guys throughout the career, because that helps them to have a longer career. Longevity matters.
Like it kind of seems like if they miraculously get that second pick, which they won't, or but a top 5 pick or something, like they're probably not taking Ace Bailey, right? They're probably going for, I don't know, guys who I mean, I don't know how Ace is doing.
Jace Richardson. Yeah.
I don't know how Ace is doing in the interview process. Maybe he's doing great, but yeah, it's something that they're going to place a lot of value on. People who say the right things and can back it up to some extent in the workouts.
Last thing I want to mention, and then we can talk about all of the other stuff I missed when I was out of town, but analytics. He mentioned analytics, and I thought that was nice to hear from a coach, because I think the Suns have had coaches that maybe weren't as into them in the past, Monty Williams being one of them. He talked about how they can help you in some ways and how you can ignore them in others. And he sort of mentioned it in a similar way, but he said analytics has helped him to stay steady and understand what you're not as bad at or you're not as good at, which I thought was an interesting way to talk about it, because I do think the nice thing about a lot of analytics that you're able to find is that they're completely emotionless. You know what I mean? There is no emotion attached to these analytics. You can look at them for what they are, and you can apply them in whatever context you want to apply them in at that point. But what they don't have is the baggage that humans have attached to them when thinking about things that happen. And I think that's sort of the way that he was describing them. So to have a head coach that's sort of forward thinking in the way that he seems to be, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, and it's understanding that they're a tool. They're not your entire approach, of course. Like, we still need head coaches. They're just using analytics as a tool. But another example that Ott is kind of from a newer generation. By the time he was hired for his first NBA gig with the Atlanta Hawks, with Mike Budenholzer in the mid-2010s, that was already the Steph era. That was already like a fairly modern basketball team, right? And so he maybe has not had to go through quite the same wave after wave of like generational differences of, like some of these guys who have been around since the 90s. And he understands the analytical movement because it's very much what he grew up with himself.
Next step for Jordan Ott will be filling out his staff. We have a couple things, thanks to Gambo, of course. Shout out to Gambo, the content machine for us every summer. But a couple of things that Gambo said. He said, look out for DeMarre Carroll as a possible assistant, someone who he has coached in the past and has been on staffs, I believe, with Mike Budenholzer and Darvin Ham. I'm not sure where DeMarre Carroll is now, but is an assistant coach. Obviously played in the NBA. If you don't remember him, was sort of a defensive role player that was pretty good in his time in the NBA, and has a great reputation from everything I've heard, including people I've spoken to off the, not publicly, have said that he seems to be a great assistant coach, somebody who could really be helpful. He also said that Fizdale won't be back, and that Jordan Ott does plan to hire a former head coach, possibly Stephen Silas, who briefly coached the Houston Rockets in a very disappointing tenure with them, but a difficult time to coach the team with James Harden sort of blowing it up there. So potentially Damari Carroll is what we've heard. We've also heard potentially Jared Dudley, which we talked about on our last podcast, and then potentially Stephen Silas and no Fizdale. Hard to have a ton of opinions on assistant coaches. We don't know much about what they do or what's going on behind the scenes, but any thoughts on that, Sam?
Carroll, just because you asked, he was also with the Cavs this year. So he spent 1 year also with Bud on the Bucks, then 1 year with the Lakers, and now 1 year with the Cavs. I think it's a good approach, right? Have certain assistants who played in the NBA, of course, because Jordan Ott did not. That was something we were stressing as part of our search. And then have some coaches who have that experience of being the number one guy, or maybe a coach who has that experience. I don't think it's super important to have like several of those guys. I don't really have any opinions about like Stephen Silas in particular.
I always liked Damari Carroll. I will say, like as a player, he just seemed like a guy who worked hard and played hard and played smart. So having him around would be kind of cool. Lastly, before we get to Kevin Durant stuff, because we got a lot of KD stuff to talk about here, Matt Ishbia sent an email right after we posted our last podcast to the entire Suns organization regarding the Jordan Ott hiring. And in that email, he said that he wants to be more involved with the decisions the organization makes going forward, and said in the past he tried out being the guy who just wrote the checks and let the basketball people make decisions. Cap! But he did say that happened. We don't believe it, and that going forward he wants to be more involved. We didn't have the opportunity to talk about this when it happened because I immediately went out of town after posting our last episode, but I am back now, so I wanted to at least mention it here. It does feel a little bit like he's blaming the Biden administration for the failures of the previous team.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I do know what to say about this. I think this was not meant to leak publicly, right? This was an internal communication that demonstrates an embarrassing misunderstanding of what it means to be a leader. And that's about, I mean, what do you got? What do you got on this?
Okay, so
like no one would blame the dude. No one would blame you to just say, I came in day one, I wanted KD, I had us blow our load for KD, then we made the Beal trade, we tried, it didn't work out, I take accountability. At no stage,
we did everything we could to try to build a winner, and it didn't work.
At no stage has he done that.
It's easy to say that.
He's
right?
now just saying, actually, that wasn't me. If I was in charge, which we all know you were, then things would be fine. And it's like, all right, dude.
Wendy sort of, offhandedly said that he thinks that Ishbia has made every trade. Not reporting that, but that's what he thinks. Look, honestly, everything I've heard says that as well. The big trades, and those are the ones. Yes, he says he didn't watch Ryan Dunn film. And yes, I believe that. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about building this team in the ways that frustrate us. Like, it's so weird to go, hey, were you the guy that made the decisions that led to the team where it is? And he goes, well, I didn't draft Ryan Dunn. I didn't watch Oso Ighodaro film. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the Bradley Beal trade. We're talking about the KD trade. And we know you were involved in those. Those are the real things that cause the issues that this team is in now. Giving up everything you possibly could for KD without having any ability to build the team better in the future, and then trading everything else you could possibly have used to make the team better for Bradley Beal. Those are the problems, and we know you were involved with that. So I think shirking all responsibility, pushing it off onto the guys who, by the way, are still here, they're still working on the team, is so weird. Like, you're talking about James Jones, who still works for the Suns. You're talking about Bartlestein, who still works for the Suns. And you're talking about Brian Gregory, who still works for the Suns. You're saying I tried letting those guys make the decisions and it didn't go well, so now they're still here. They're still making decisions, but I'm going to be more involved. I think it's ridiculous. But the one thing I will say, there is no hiding from this failure if it happens again. There is no hiding from it now because he is very publicly saying that what happens now And what happens with this team going forward, that's me. I'm making those decisions going forward. So Matt Ishbia, if you're taking credit for everything that happens now, there's no shirking this responsibility later. We will remember that you said this, and we will, as a fan base at the very least, hold you responsible for it. And if it goes well, take the credit. Fine. I don't care. I don't know. I hope it goes well.
Deserve
that's really how I feel.
If you control decisions and things go well, then you deserve that credit. You deserve that credit. But you also deserve the accountability that comes with poor decision making. It's just not that hard to own it when you make a bad decision.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's funny, man. He's funny.
Yeah. He deserves, look, I went back and I watched the press conference at the end of the season, the embarrassing, he said the team was embarrassing, right? And he talked about how he wanted to be more involved then. And when he talked about it then, the implication was not necessarily in basketball decisions. It was setting the tone, setting the culture. For the team.
I remember that.
Right? And I liked that. I thought, okay, like ultimately, buzzword by the way here, but ultimately in order to have an organization that's fully aligned, everyone needs to be on the same page with how they talk about things, because that's how you ingrain it into the culture of an organization. Everyone has to talk about it. It has to be something you repeat over and over and over again, and people start buying into it. And from an ownership standpoint, all the way down to the trainers and players and everyone else, if they're all on the same page, if they all speak about it the same way, that can be really helpful. So at that time, I liked it, but I think the implication now with this email is it goes well beyond that. It's basketball decisions. It's everything, which is something we expected. But now we know for sure that's the case.
One thing that gets me is, like, I'm trying to imagine what it looks like now that Matt Ishbia is in charge of basketball decision-making. Does he know? I mean, he writes the check, so I know he's aware of the existence of the aprons, but, like, does he know about some of these restrictions, some of these apron restrictions? Is he out here trying to aggregate salaries in a trade, and then he has 5 people in the front office being like, Matt, you can't do that. We've told you 6 times you can't do that. And he's just like sending everyone in the front office, oh, we should do this. We should do this trade. We should do this trade. He's got to learn the CBA. If you're out here saying you want to make the decisions, that CBA is complicated. There is no more Larry Kuhn CBA FAQ.com. That does not exist for the new CBA. So I'm just saying, Matt, get educated, because it's not going to be easy.
I just heard about this concept called 20-page knowledge. And it's about people who read the first 20 pages of a book and then go, yeah, I got the gist of it. And that's kind of how I feel like he understands the CBA. He's got 20-page knowledge of the CBA, which is a few hundred pages. So I don't know. You need to hire people, ultimately, that understand that. I've heard that some of the cap people, I don't know if I should repeat this, but I've heard that some of the cap people that worked for the Suns in the past no longer work for the Suns.
Yeah, but
right
I'm sure they've hired. I'm sure there are cap people in the front office who understand.
Sure hope
that.
So.
But if Ishbia is he's the guy who has final say over a trade now. Do you know how much like efficiency in a draft war room you're losing if the guy who's your lead decision maker doesn't fully understand what's being presented in front of him, right? When every other GM in the league who is a decision maker, who has been empowered in those positions, fully understands what they can and cannot do. And I really wonder if Matt does. I know he understands that the second apron exists and that the luxury tax exists and that like it's more money coming out of his pocket. I know he understands that. But some of the other stuff, I don't know. This, like, you can't just armchair GM your way into a successful season. And it kind of feels like that's what they're trying to do. But good luck.
Well, this is the first decision made in the Matt Ishbia is taking credit for the decisions era, and that's hiring Jordan Ott and Brian Gregory. So I hope this one works. I like Jordan Ott. I think he.
So do I.
I hope they give him a fair chance. I hope they give him a roster that actually makes sense with what he's trying to do and what he views the future of the NBA. And I hope he gets the opportunity to build that over multiple seasons, not just this year, because of the success of it. So we'll see what happens going forward. Let's talk about Kevin Durant. We have a lot of Kevin Durant stuff to talk about as well when it comes to potential trades. And that is, well, where do we want to start? Let's do a couple of things here. I want to first talk about every team from my memory, right? I'm just going off of memory, that it has been reported these teams are interested in potentially trading for Kevin Durant. Clippers, and this is, by the way, not us, just a bunch of reporters all over the NBA. Clippers, Toronto, the Knicks, Minnesota, Miami, San Antonio, and Houston. I'll repeat it. Clippers,
FC Barcelona,
Toronto.
Real Madrid,
right?
The Olympiacos. I mean, everyone's
Wrexham,
Cheska Moscow. Everyone's in on this. I mean, everyone wants a piece.
So New York, Minnesota, Miami, San Antonio, Houston, Los Angeles, Toronto. That's a pretty big list. Like we talked about how what's best for the Suns is that there's a large group of teams that are interested, because then they could potentially play the leverage game. The ideal situation for the Suns is that Kevin Durant is interested in more than one team and that he's willing to play at more than one team. That way you could leverage those teams against each other to try and get as many assets as possible. We do have some reporting, including by me a few weeks ago on the Patreon podcast. Sorry, everyone else. I didn't have the ability to share that with everyone, but that he was interested in playing for the Spurs. That's been repeated multiple times by a bunch of different sources. At this point, Kevin Durant seems to be okay with playing with the Spurs or open to it. Doesn't
let's just be real.
Mean that's the only team.
I just want to speak to the fact that you spoke on that on the Patreon pod right now, which is that like sometimes us as people who have always centered ourselves as like analysts, not newsbreakers, it's like sometimes you do hear a thing behind the scenes, but you're not in a position to like you're gonna let a newsbreaker do their job. And kind of like confirm with multiple sources and like, you know, wait some time before it officially becomes public. But that doesn't mean there aren't whispers about it in the league atmosphere already. Yeah. And the Spurs stuff has been going around for a little while.
It's been bubbling. Yeah. For, I would say 3-ish weeks is when it sort of started behind the scenes here. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he's definitely going to go to the Spurs. But I think one thing we know is that he's interested in playing there, or at least that's the reporting. Now, whether or not that opens up to also the Clippers and also the Knicks or something like that, I think would be nice for the Suns, but it's not something we can guarantee. Across those teams, I think San Antonio, which is the only team we know he's interested in, has the best draft assets, which is kind of nice just to think about the potential of getting sort of draft assets back, outside of course, the Houston Rockets, who own the Suns' picks. The surprise teams, I think, that came up recently, and teams that we have yet to talk about as, I think, potential trade partners on this podcast are the Clippers and the Raptors.
And we've been racking our heads for these proposals. We've been doing this for months, and never did the Clippers or Raptors come
I
up.
did bring up the Clippers once, and I mentioned it's just really hard for them to come up with the salary necessary to trade for him. In fact, I did a fake trade at the trade deadline.
What's the Raptors deal here? This was reported by Mark Stein. I feel like they were just tossed into the conversation as like, oh yeah, the Raptors are interested. And like, okay, fine. I'm fine with having a bidding war, and I'm fine if there are like 7 teams. The more the merrier. But do the Raptors think they can trade for KD?
Can I tell you my suspicion
be like contenders next year? Because I don't think they can.
I have a theory.
Unless Scotty Barnes takes like a massive leap.
Okay, this will be a nice transition into my trades here, because we do trades every week at the end of the podcast. Sam did his fake trades last week. It's my turn to come up with fake trades this week. Sometimes when you hear things, you hear only part of what is happening. And let's just say someone from Toronto told somebody, a reporter like Mark Stein, Toronto was talking to Phoenix about the KD trade. Maybe the part that was missing is that they were talking to them about being a third team in the KD trade. And that was my theory when I saw Toronto in there, because I could see Toronto being interested in some assets that the Spurs have. And that's kind of how I thought about this trade. So let's talk about the Spurs, and I'll tell you how they potentially connect to Toronto as far as one of my fake trades here. But Spurs assets. We've done fake Spurs trades. In fact, the very first fake Spurs trade that we did, I believe, was me trading the Atlanta Hawks picks to the Suns, and the Suns using the Hawks picks plus salary from the San Antonio Spurs to trade for Trae Young, which I still think, if it's out there, you think about that. If the Hawks get 2 of their picks back and they have the ability of centering their team around Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels and then figuring out what to do from there, I think it's not the worst in Ricochet. Yeah, it's not the worst version of that team going forward. They can be bad for a few seasons. They can get a few more high picks and put them around them, and then they get off Trae Young. The Suns have a second star next to Devin Booker they could potentially build around. Now, are there problems with building around Trae Young? Yes. But if you're trading Kevin Durant, you have the opportunity to get a star at the level of Trae Young, you should consider it. Now, outside of that, let's talk about what the Spurs could potentially trade, because I do think there are some interesting things here. Vassell is the first one. Vassell is their salary, right? This is the guy that makes the most money that they could potentially send in a trade. And I think if you're the San Antonio Spurs, if you can't build a trade around Harrison Barnes and Keldon Johnson, and if you're the Suns, you say absolutely no to that. If you can't do that, then you start with Vassell in a trade, and then you add some salary to that.
Is Barnes and Johnson by itself even legal, or would they still need Sohan or another piece?
They would still need more. Yeah. That's like
So it's
that's like $40 million.
Part of it is Vassell is actually a good player, but also part of it is like if they trade Vassell, who makes I want to say $27 million off the top of my head. Yeah. If they don't trade Vassell, they need to give up like 4 or 5 players who each make like 15 in a package in order to make this work. And you're losing a lot of depth there. You are. I mean, I think maybe you value Vassell more than that depth. But either way, Vassell just makes the most sense.
So I'm trying to come up with the concept of a trade for the Spurs that makes sense for them and allows them to have the best possible team to compete next year, where they give up something that I would consider reasonable from their perspective. And so I started the trade essentially with Harrison Barnes, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, the 14th pick from this year, and a future Hawks pick. Now, that's a lot, but it's also not that much in that they're not giving up Castle.
Yeah.
They're not giving up the second overall pick, right? The assets they have, you're allowing them to keep 2 great ones. Now, if you can come up with the trade from the Suns' perspective where you get the second overall pick or you get Castle, then you do that one, right? Or you figure out a way to do that one. But if you can't, and this is where you're starting with Barnes, Vassell, Sohan, the 14th pick, and a future Hawks pick, I think you're doing okay with that. What I tried to do...
That is such a no-brainer. Let me just jump in and say, if you're the Spurs and the Suns are willing to agree to that, personally, I would prefer that they juice more out of it, and this is where I'm sure your proposals are going. But if you're the Spurs and you can get the Suns to agree to that, that is such a no-brainer. Like, you're drafting Dylan Harper, and he might play 16 minutes a game in his rookie year. And that's the second overall pick. Because you've got Fox and Castle. Like, they still have so much talent on their team. And they have a starting 5.
Or they could trade Castle for someone else, right? They can continue to try to get better. Yeah.
I think if you're the Suns, you really should be insistent on trying to get Castle in this proposal. However, I'd be willing to hear it out based on what you have to say where, if you could turn Vassell into something different, routing him to
this is where team. So this is the problems that you run into for the Suns, right? Vassell plays Devin Booker's position. He plays Bradley Beal's position. From all accounts, Bradley Beal, it seems like it's going to be near impossible for Bradley Beal to be gone from the Suns. And if he is gone from the Suns, if you find a way to do it, then maybe you consider keeping Vassell at that point. But if you're not keeping Vassell, my goal in these trades was to come up with a third team for Devin Vassell and just talk about the potential options that there would be for the Phoenix Suns if they were able to get him to a third team. And then we can talk about which one of those you like the best. Since I brought up Toronto, let's talk about them first. In my first proposal to you, Kevin Durant goes to the Spurs. Devin Vassell goes to Toronto. The Suns end the trade with, of course, the 2 picks I talked about, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, Jakob Poeltl, and Ochai Agbaji.
Yeah, Agbaji kind of sucks. That's fine, though. He's just there for salary.
He kind of sucks, but he's also young.
Yeah.
And
actually, how old is he? Like 22 or something still?
Probably 22, 23. I don't have it in front of me. And then you still have 2 picks.
Yeah, you have 2 picks in this draft. And we know the Suns are interested in a center, and I talked about Poeltl, I think, last week, too. Poeltl's a good center. He's not the best center, but he's a perfectly capable starting center. I would say average.
He's like if Nurkic was good.
Yeah, average starting center who can do a little bit of playmaking. Of course.
His rim protection numbers are pretty good, but he's not very versatile when it comes to defense.
So I think the main concern here, I would be okay with this, I think, but you do run into that concern of, are you locked into keeping Bradley Beal, and is Bradley Beal now just like has to be your second scorer next year? Because like where else you're not Harrison Barnes.
You can start that way, but I don't think you'll end the season that way. Let's just
Harrison Barnes and Jakob Poeltl are rock solid role players.
They start.
Yeah,
on
sure.
This team, probably.
But neither of them is like touching even like 18 points per game, right? So like you need a second guy on the roster somewhere who can give you 18 and 5. And if that has to be Bradley Beal, that's concerning.
All right, let's do another one.
Sure.
Spurs get Kevin Durant. The Nets get Devin Vassell. The Suns get Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, Cam Johnson. Of course, the 14th pick in this draft with a future Hawks pick. So that's Harrison Barnes, Cam Johnson, 2 starting forwards, probably, and then 1 forward coming off the bench in Sohan.
Yeah, it's a lot of size in forwards. And forwards who can shoot, and Sohan.
You got wings. The Suns are missing wings. You got potentially 3 wings there.
I wonder if there would be a center for them. That's a weird draft, remember? So I wonder who would be there for them to take at. Not that like these are the main considerations when you make a trade like this, but like I wonder who'd be there at 14. I wonder if there would be a potential starting caliber center there for them at 14. Because that would be, we were talking, when did we have Tyler Rucker on? Was that 2 weeks ago?
It's the beginning of last week. Because we had 2 podcasts last week, yeah.
So that was the beginning of last week, and we were talking about, some of the guys who I anticipate being available in the back half of the first round, like Maxime Reynaud or Ryan Kalkbrenner or whatever. Taking those guys at 14 would certainly be a reach. But I wonder, like, maybe you could get like a Thomas Sorber or something like that. That would be interesting.
I don't hate it, and I think you can also make a version of this trade with Claxton, and just get Claxton back in this trade.
Yeah, I'd rather have Cam than Claxton. I
would too. I think Cam's just a better player. I think.
Yeah, Cam just scores way more. He's going to help your spacing constantly, and Claxton's coming off a real. It is a buy low opportunity. Like I don't hate the idea of acquiring Claxton in some context, but in the context of like as the main return, basically for a KD trade, it doesn't work for me. I think
Vassell has more value.
Yeah,
honestly, that's kind of how I think of it. If you get Claxton and then the Nets are willing to give up a pick or something, then maybe you do it at that point. But I'm not sure that they would be. I don't think they would be willing to do that, I guess is how I would put it. You want to hear another? I got 2 more.
I want to hear as many as you've got.
All right. Well, I also have some names.
I want to hear the FC Barcelona proposal next.
Spurs get KD. Orlando, all reliable, gets Vassell, who I think would fit on that team really well. The Suns get Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, Cole Anthony, Goga Batadze.
Oh, huh.
The 14th pick from the Spurs, the Hawks' future pick, and then a lottery-protected Magic first-round pick from 2026.
2026. Okay, lottery-protected.
So essentially, the Magic trade Cole Anthony and Goga Batadze plus a pick for Devin Vassell, because it gives them some sort of lottery or some sort of insurance that if it goes badly and they end up in the lottery, they can keep their first-round pick. But if it goes well and Vassell fits into their team well, stays healthy, then the Suns would get that pick sort of outside of the lottery.
And like the Magic are, with the exception of if one of their main 2 guys just goes down for the entire season, they're going to be a playoff team next year.
I think so too.
Right?
And I think that Cole Anthony and Goga are fine, and Vassell is better. Like I think Vassell, if he's healthy, can remain a rock solid rotation piece. What they thought KCP was going to be on that team, and probably better. And fits into their team defensively and also provides the shooting that I think they need offensively. And honestly, if I were talking about the fits for Vassell as a player, Orlando is my favorite one as far as fitting on that team. And that's why I wanted to extract a little bit more from them.
I think Goga, a lot of people talk glowingly about Goga, myself included, who is a tremendous rim protector. But the reason they talk glowingly about Goga is because of his contract. He makes like $8 million a year for the next 2 years. So he's on one of the best contracts currently in the NBA. And eventually you'll have to pay him if he's here long term. But like, he has a great contract. That is undeniable. He is also at best, I don't know, the 25th best starting center in the NBA, right? Like it would be a starting center who is clearly an upgrade over Nick Richards. But let's not go crazy and talk about Goga like, he's not a better player than Devin Vassell, to your point.
Yeah, that's why you need the pick, right, basically. So the Suns could potentially end this with 3 picks: Barnes, Sohan, Cole Anthony, and Goga. Not a single player to get overly excited about, but all rotation pieces.
This is really the smorgasbord trade. This is the potpourri. Yeah. You've got like hella role players for next year and 3 picks, which is nothing to sneeze at. But like certainly nothing. I mean, there's not a castle. Again, like, in certain of these trades, if you either get a second star to pair with Booker or a premier like B+, A- prospect, that's how you get the fan base the most excited, and this trade lacks that.
All right, one more, and then I'll just name some names that I think could be out there. KD goes to the Spurs. Devin Vassell goes to the Bulls. Harrison Barnes, Sohan, Kobe White.
Oh, I like Kobe White.
And Jalen Smith goes to the Suns. Jalen Smith was actually pretty much out of their rotation late in the season.
Jalen Smith, the return?
The return.
The prodigal son returns
Josh
to avenge his father, James Jones?
Josh Giddey's a point guard.
Yeah.
Kobe White's a point guard.
Yeah, Josh Giddey.
Just pointing it out.
What did Giddey average post All-Star break? Like 20 and 10? Did they win those games? I don't know enough about the Bulls. I was not watching Bulls
They played pretty
games.
well at the end of the season, but well enough to get into the play-in. But just throwing it out there, is there a world where you can get Kobe White for Devin Vassell? And by the way, if the Suns end up with the 14th pick and the 29th pick, would you include the 29th pick to get Kobe White out of Vassell?
If you still
know what I mean?
If you still had 14, yeah.
And then a potential future Hawks pick from the Spurs?
Kobe White has gotten so much better over the past 2 years.
He plays so fast, too. We're talking about speed. He plays so fast.
He also shoots a ton of threes. At this stage, he didn't always, but now he shoots a ton of threes and he shoots them at a pretty good percentage. Yeah,
he's fun. Yeah,
I like Kobe White. Can you get Kobe
There's
White?
There's a guy who could potentially get 18 points a game, like you talked about, and also I think can kind of play that Darius Garland role a little bit. If you're talking about the way the Cavs played with Jordan Ott,
this is asking for too much.
Kobe White's a guy.
Can you get Kobe White and Cam Johnson somehow? Can we make it a 4-team trade?
Do you think
so?
Actually,
We can
maybe.
get the UNC reunion of the he went what?
So Harrison Barnes would have to go to.
Wow.
Harrison Barnes would have to go to the Nets.
That's so love, bro. If you
Harrison
don't know
Barnes
what I'm
is an
talking about,
expiring. Harrison Barnes is an expiring contract. So, like from the Nets' perspective, if that's something they're interested in, potentially you could send. He doesn't make quite enough. I don't know. Maybe they would want Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sohan together, and then you can end up with Kobe White, Cam Johnson, and Jalen Smith on the Suns.
That's a very funny team.
It's not the worst.
It's a very funny team.
It's not the worst. Other names I just want to throw out there as potential Devin Vassell third team options, third or fourth team in some of these ways. Lauri Markkanen, you just got to put it out there. If Lauri Markkanen is available, you trade, because I think Lauri Markkanen and Devin Vassell are probably relatively equal as players when it comes to value at this point. Markkanen had a worse season than Vassell. So maybe now's your chance to get somebody like Markkanen who actually size-wise fits better with Devin Booker.
Markkanen is also a great fit if you're actually talking about like, let's play 2 bigs and crash the glass, but we still want a guy who's mobile and can shoot threes. I mean, that's Lauri Markkanen.
Drew Holiday.
Yeah, he's out there. He is.
He's out there. He's going to be traded. If you can find if you say you get Vassell on the Suns, you finish the trade, Vassell's on the Suns right now. And then you can find a 3-team trade where Vassell goes to a team and the Celtics get whatever they want from a Drew Holiday team. I think the Suns would probably do that. Drew Holiday, look, I understand people are going, Drew Holiday wasn't very good for the Celtics. Look, honestly, the standards the Celtics have and the standards the Suns have for not very good right now are different. He would be an upgrade for the Suns still. And I think culturally, finding someone that can help you establish a culture like Drew Holiday that starts next to Devin Booker, there's value in that.
Would this be the next Chris Paul trade? Could Drew Holiday
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Lift all boats? Boston was his OKC, and Phoenix will be his Phoenix. What does Boston want for Drew Holiday? Has anyone said?
Salary, probably expiring salary. I think
okay,
if they're not going to be good next year,
they're really treating it as a dump then.
Yeah, I think so.
Huh.
I think so. I don't know that there's a lot of value otherwise. I mean, there are teams that would want Drew Holiday, I think, but what they're willing to give up in assets would be
I mean, I don't
interesting.
think he's like a multiple first-round pick guy anymore, but he's one first-round pick and some interesting salary filler that isn't like useless. I think he could get you that.
Can I mention the Pistons here too? Do you think they'd be interested in Vassell? Because I just put them on there as a team that could be interested in somebody like Vassell. His contract is for 4 years. He makes like less than $30 million a year, and he's pretty good. So,
I think the Pistons are definitely at the stage where they want to be like legit good, especially because they sense, as you're noting, the power vacuum in the Eastern Conference if Tatum misses, with Tatum missing a year. All the more reason for the Pistons to kind of be one of these teams that pushes their chips and goes all in my opinion. But I don't know.
It's tough to find the trade. Like
I don't know.
Ron Holland and Fontecchio, like that's not enough for the Suns. Or maybe Jalen Durant and Ron Holland. I don't know if they're willing to put two young guys in a trade like that.
I think they are willing to move on from Jalen Durant, but you're right. Multiple guys, I don't think so. I also don't know exactly what their intentions are at this point with Jaden Ivey, because the difficult thing with the Pistons is they have Cade at the 1, Ivey at the 2, Thompson at the 3. Hypothetically speaking, all three of those guys are still supposed to be like a really important part of their future. And so where are the minutes coming from is my question for Vassell. It needs to come, at the expense of one of those guys if they're willing to maybe move on from one of those guys or give them a lesser role. It's a good question.
Jalen Suggs.
Jalen Suggs.
Out there. Yeah.
It's my guy. I do like Jalen Suggs.
They make very similar amount of money. Suggs makes a little bit more. Always injured. And that's tough for either team, whether it be Orlando or Phoenix, just having a guy who has an injury history like that. But I don't know if that would be willing to do Suggs for Vassell. I don't think they would, unless they really believe in Anthony Black as a point guard. Darius Garland is also potentially available. I'm not saying that the Suns could trade Vassell for Garland, but like if Garland is out there and available and you just hired his former assistant coach or a guy who coached for that team and you have a similar salary, well, makes less obviously in Vassell, is there a world where you put multiple salaries together to try to find a way to trade for Darius Garland? I'd say yes, they're going to try. I don't think the Suns have the assets though.
I'm going to throw some cold water on that one because of the Dan Gilbert factor, which is he going to allow his star point guard to go to Phoenix and Matt?
It's fair. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It depends on how powerful. Well, now I have to Google who Darius Garland's agent is. This is the conversation I always have because it's like, how powerful is the agent? Because those guys have a lot of control over where these guys end up going. Rich Paul. So that's a pretty powerful agent, just throwing it out there. If these guys want to get to where they want to get to, having the right agent to help them get there could matter. Not saying you would want to come to the Suns, but there was some buzz before last season that if Donovan Mitchell re-signed in Cleveland, that Darius Garland would want to play somewhere else. And I feel like everyone forgot that once they got Kenny Atkinson and it went really well for them. But that was there. Like that was a report that came out right before Donovan Mitchell signed that contract. So I don't know. Maybe there's still a little bit of something there. And not saying the Suns will get him, but if he is traded, I wouldn't be surprised. Out of all those options, which one excites you the most?
Oh, man.
Let me repeat the guys that you could potentially get. Now, obviously, we're starting with Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sohan.
Mm-hmm.
So you got Cam Johnson.
Yeah.
You got Cole Anthony and Goga. You got Jakob Poeltl, Agbaji, too.
Mm-hmm.
Kobe White and Jalen Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Lauri Markkanen and Drew Holiday. Just all those names that I didn't actually do trades for.
Yeah, I mean, I like the majority of those names. I like Cam Johnson for sure. Kobe White for sure. Jakob Poeltl I do like. What was the one I didn't like?
Cole Anthony and Goga, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
Cole Anthony and Goga, maybe a little bit less.
It's an extra first-round pick was included there.
That's true. Yeah, that's making up the value a little bit. But yeah, I fundamentally have so little faith in Bradley Beal if he's going to be on this team to do anything, that there's just this desire to have a second guy next to Booker who is like projects a certain level of competence. In a way that Cam Johnson would, in a way that Kobe White would, certain guys. Even Vassell. I mean, honestly, if they just kept Vassell is, I know he plays the same position. He can play the 3. But he is competent. I'll give him that. I would rather have more in that package. But yeah, that is important to me.
All of the buzz that we're hearing is that Kevin Durant is going to be traded before the draft. So that's a few weeks away. So we have a few weeks before we potentially find out. It could happen any day now.
Also,
now that they have a coach.
I don't remember if you mentioned it, but Ott said during his presser that they will be hiring assistants throughout the month, is what he said.
They're going to take their time, is what he said.
Yeah, he said they're going to take their time, but then he also said specifically throughout the month. So, expect all of these decisions to be aligned and made within the next 3 weeks or so, and we won't. I have a feeling like, we're going to have like this very rushed kind of free agency episode at some point on June 29th, because a lot of shit is going to happen before then.
Can I also say, since you brought up that press conference, Brian Gregory said they talked to other players around the league as far as what they want in a head coach. Players who do not play for the Suns. And it was the time that I thought, this guy's got to learn how to be a GM here. You don't mention that you're talking to other players on other teams. You're not allowed to do that.
I think
that could be considered tampering.
I think you can in certain contexts, but you're right. It's not something you want.
All you have to do is have another team hear that and go, who are they talking to and what are they saying?
Remember when they lost?
You just don't say it.
Remember when they lost a second-round pick for Drew Eubanks?
Yeah, that's the type of thing that could happen for saying something like that, especially if one of those guys ends up on the Suns. You're out there talking to, Lauri Markkanen about what he wants in a head coach, and then you trade for him. That could be considered a little suspicious. That's all I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You just avoid saying those things so that you don't potentially lose a second-round pick the way they did in the past. Anyway, lots of KD stuff out there. I know people listening to this are going to get on the trade machine, try and find third teams for Devin Vassell. It could be as simple as the Suns don't trade for Devin Vassell, they keep him, and they try to get Castle instead, right? And that's just what they try to do instead. And they get something like Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, Castle, and a pick or two.
I mean, I like
and
that.
That's
I do.
As simple as the trade gets. Yeah, and that's interesting. I think as far as next year goes, maybe you try to find a home for one of those other guys like Harrison Barnes or Keldon Johnson. Harrison Barnes being an expiring salary, maybe you can attach a pick to him and try and find something there. But yeah, it's just one of those things that you're going to throw out there.
I'm just looking at some of the other guys who are like right at, so Vassell makes 27. So if you're going to move him, it needs to be, who are the guys who are just under 27 in the league in some cases. Utah's going to move on from John Collins.
Yeah.
Any interest? He actually had kind of a good season last year.
He became a shooter this year.
Yeah.
Like he was a shooter. I don't mind John Collins. I think there's a world where he is pretty good. I liked him this year. I thought he would have been a lot worse than he was.
Yeah. It's just he's kind of like in the prime of his career and isn't going to get any better than he is. But yeah.
You got to keep Devin Booker happy. We need to help him. That's what Ott said.
Miles Bridges.
We need to help Devin Booker.
Is that $25 million?
I just like. He also said he wants high character guys.
I have to say it
out there.
Yeah, no, you're right.
He said he wants high character guys. Is the most important thing. All right. That's all we got this week. There's going to be more to cover. We're going to have a Patreon episode later this week in case I have secret slop that I can only share there. You have to join our Patreon in order to hear it. It's patreon.com/thetimeline. You can also join our Discord if you join us there. We talk about all that stuff in that Discord as well, without a bunch of trolls from other teams in there annoying us. So yeah, patreon.com/thetimeline. We appreciate y'all. We'll be back soon with a midweek episode. And yeah, good luck to Jordan Ott. I hope you're successful as a Phoenix Suns head coach.